Think about the last really bad argument you had.
Yeah.
Your blood was probably pumping, and, you were absolutely convinced you were in the right.
Oh, yeah. And the other person is just acting completely impossible, right?
Exactly. But what if the problem wasn't that the other person was wrong? Or, what if the problem wasn't even that you were wrong?
Wait, what you mean?
Well, what if the fundamental problem was simply that you existed in that argument at all?
Wow. Okay, yeah, that is an incredibly uncomfortable question to ask. Mostly because it goes against literally everything modern society drills into us.
Okay.
We are surrounded by this constant cultural drumbeat telling us to, just be yourself.
Oh, yeah. It's on coffee mugs, commencement speeches.
Yeah, just a billion-dollar self-help industry. We basically operate on this fundamental assumption that if everyone just acts as their truest, most authentic self, the world will somehow fall into this beautiful, harmonious rhythm.
Which is exactly what makes the source material we're unpacking for you today so incredibly jarring.
Yeah, definitely.
We are doing a deep dive into a 2021 essay by an author named Shui Feng. And the title alone is basically a direct attack on that whole coffee mug philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
It's called "The Best Method of Self-Cultivation is to Give Up on Being Yourself."
Just right out of the gate with it.
Exactly. So the mission of this deep dive is to really explore this radical, completely countercultural argument. Because the author isn't just suggesting you compromise occasionally to keep the peace.
Right, no. He is arguing that being yourself is actually a trap. Like it's a low-level way of living, and that true freedom and true harmony really only comes from abandoning the self entirely.
So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the text forces us to look at the friction in our daily lives, like the stress, the arguments, the global conflicts. And it asks us to consider a completely different diagnosis.
Yeah, it suggests the problem isn't that we are failing to be true to ourselves. The problem is that we have a self to begin with.
Right. And to lay the groundwork for a claim that massive, the author doesn't just rely on his own, modern observations. He really anchors this concept in history.
He brings in the heavy hitters.
Yeah. He brings in major spiritual figures to demonstrate that giving up the self isn't some quirky new hot take. It is a very ancient foundational concept shared across widely different traditions.
Yeah, he begins by highlighting a unified thread of this no-self philosophy, and he starts with Jesus.
Okay.
The text quotes the biblical instruction where Jesus says, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross." And he goes on to say, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it."
Let's actually look at the mechanics of that quote, because
Yeah.
it presents this fascinating paradox, right? Holding onto yourself destroys you, but letting go saves you.
Right.
How does self-preservation actually lead to self-destruction?
Well, think of it like building a fortress. When your primary goal is to save your life or yourself, you start building walls to protect your identity, your reputation, your possessions.
Oh, I see.
And eventually, those walls get so high and so thick that you are completely isolated. The fortress you built to protect yourself becomes your prison.
Wow.
Yeah, the author argues that Jesus was pointing out this exact psychological trap.
And there's a striking similarity when the author shifts from Christian theology to Buddhist thought, too.
Oh, totally.
He points out that the Buddha, Shakyamuni, taught that a true bodhisattva is someone who thoroughly understands the dharma of no self.
Which is a huge concept.
Yeah. And for anyone listening who might be unfamiliar with the terminology, a bodhisattva is essentially an enlightened being who delays their own ultimate paradise out of compassion, choosing to stay behind and help others reach enlightenment.
Right. And the Dharma essentially refers to the fundamental law or truth of the universe. In Buddhism, the illusion of the self is the absolute root of all human suffering.
Really, the absolute root.
Yeah, so long as you believe you are a separate, distinct entity from the rest of the universe, you will experience pain and loss and craving.
Oh, interesting.
So the author uses this to draw a direct line between the Christian idea of actively denying the self and the Buddhist idea of realizing the self never truly existed in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then he also brings in Laozi, the foundational figure of Taoism.
Yes.
The quote he pulls from Laozi points directly at the mechanics of human anxiety. Laozi asks why we have fears, and his answer is profound. He says, "We have fears because we have a self. When we do not regard that self as a self, what have we to fear?"
And that is a crucial pivot in the essay, because Laozi is pointing out that fear requires an object to be threatened.
Oh, right.
If you have an identity, an ego, a specific set of preferences, you suddenly have property that needs to be defended. You have a perimeter to guard against insults, failures, or rejections.
Wow. Yeah.
And the text notes Laozi's ultimate conclusion here. If you love the world as yourself, the world can actually be entrusted to your care.
I want to try visualizing this because the self or the ego can feel like such an abstract concept sometimes.
Oh, definitely.
Reading through these historical texts, it feels to me like the ego is a heavy, clunky suit of medieval armor.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like we put it on early in life and we spend decades upgrading it, painting our unique little crest on the chest plate, thinking it's going to protect us from the world. We think the armor defines who we are.
That is a highly effective way to visualize it. And what Laozi is pointing out is that the armor itself is the source of the fear.
Right.
You spend your whole life terrified of getting dents in it. It restricts your movement. You can't feel the breeze. You can't truly embrace anyone because there's always, an inch of cold steel between you and the rest of reality.
Exactly. And this aligns perfectly with how the text defines the ideal state of being, what the author calls the saint.
Right, the concept of the saint.
Yeah. According to the essay, a saint is someone who has no decided opinions. Instead, they regard the feelings and opinions of the people around them as their own. They have zero sense of an individual self, which allows them to unite with the Tao, the fundamental, unobstructed flow of the universe.
The flow, yeah.
The text literally says the Tao is me, and I am the Tao.
Yeah.
And you clearly cannot achieve that kind of fluid, universal connection if you are clanking around in a rigid suit of armor.
No, you really can't. Which brings up a very natural question. If taking off the armor is the ancient spiritual ideal, why has modern society spent the last century doing the exact opposite?
Right.
What happens when an entire global culture obsessively reinforces its armor? So here, the text transitions from ancient theory to a direct, blistering diagnosis of the modern condition.
Yeah, the author basically argues that our current model of being yourself is fundamentally flawed. He says its realm is too low. And he uses this incredibly vivid imagery, stating that when you insist on being yourself, there are thorns and spears everywhere.
Oh, the imagery is so striking. And you can contrast that with his description of the no-ego state. Without an ego, the text says, there are green hills and blue waters everywhere. There are light breezes and a clear moon, always.
Wow.
It's deliberate, right? Thorns and spears catch, tear, and puncture. But breezes and moonlight simply flow over and through everything without resistance.
I want to expand on my armor analogy to explain these thorns and spears. Let's borrow a concept from physics.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine those suits of armor are actually incredibly powerful magnets.
Yeah.
When you define your ego, when you decide this is who I am and these are my boundaries, you are giving your magnet a specific polarity.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. When you walk into a room with someone else who has their own heavily defined ego, it's like pushing two identical magnetic poles together.
They repel.
Yes. The closer you try to force them, the more violently they repel each other. That invisible, violent repulsion is the thorns and spears.
That perfectly explains how the author applies this concept to every scale of human interaction, starting at the micro level.
Right. He asks a very blunt question in the essay. Why do couples divorce? And his answer cuts right through all the complex psychological reasons we usually give. He simply says, because they both want to be themselves.
Think about the mechanics of a failing marriage through that lens. If two people are rigidly committed to asserting their individual identities, like their career goals, their preferences for how the house should look, their absolute need to be right in an argument, friction is basically inevitable.
Yeah.
There are two magnets violently repelling each other. The text argues that if you don't want to be yourself, but instead melt your preferences into the other party, the conflict instantly evaporates.
And then the author scales this exact same logic all the way up to the macro level, applying it to global geopolitics. He writes, China and the United States are in conflict because they both want to be themselves.
Okay, let's pause there for a second, because anyone listening who follows international relations is probably shaking their head right now.
Oh, sure. Is the author genuinely arguing that a massive geopolitical conflict involving intricate supply chains, military posturing, historical grievances, and complex treaties boils down to the exact same dynamic as two spouses arguing over who unloads the dishwasher.
He is. And to understand it, it requires us to step back and look at global affairs strictly through his philosophical lens. And I want to be super clear here for the listener. We are not taking a political side or endorsing either nation's policies in this deep dive.
Right, of course, we're just looking at his theory.
Exactly. The text isn't concerned with the specific nuances of terrace or territorial waters. It views all friction as a fundamental symptom of the ego. From this perspective, a nation is just a collective ego. It's a giant collective suit of armor.
Wow.
When two massive entities rigidly insist on their own identities, their own supremacy, and their own self-interest, you get global thorns and spears.
So the pattern is fractal. It looks exactly the same whether you zoom in on a kitchen table or zoom out to the United Nations. The author even extends this to any collective group. He says a group made up of people who all want to be themselves becomes a mess of quarrels and fights. But if everyone in that collective gives up on being themselves, it becomes harmonious and auspicious.
So logically, if the ego is the source of all these thorns and spears, the obvious solution is to drop it. Just take off the armor, disengage the magnet.
Right. But, okay, if you are tracking with this philosophy as a listener, taking off your armor raises a massive, glaring issue of vulnerability.
Oh, absolutely.
If I drop my ego and melt into the other person, what if the other person is holding a sword? What if they are malicious? The author anticipates this exact skepticism, right?
He does. He poses the crucial question that any rational person would ask at this stage. What if I give up on myself, but the other party is uncivilized, barbaric, and oppressive? Should I just bear insults? Should I let myself be bullied and trampled on?
And his answer to that is an uncompromising yes. He says you have to accept it. But his reasoning for why you have to accept it takes us into some very intense, almost uncomfortable philosophical territory.
Very uncomfortable.
He brings in the concepts of karma and debt, saying you have to trace history and ask yourself why you met this specific person in the first place.
Right. To make this no-self approach work in the face of active aggression, the philosophy demands an absolute radical shift in perspective.
Yeah.
The text requires you to have complete faith in the inherent fairness of the Tao, the underlying order of the universe. The logic operates on a cosmic scale. Basically, since the Tao makes no mistakes, whatever is happening to you right now is fundamentally fair, even if your limited human perspective cannot comprehend the reason.
Right.
Therefore, your only job is to abandon your ego and leave the arrangement to the Tao.
Okay, I mean, I cannot just let that slide. Telling someone who is actively being oppressed, abused, or bullied that they should just bear it because the universe is fair sounds incredibly dangerous.
Oh, I hear you.
The author makes these intense claims, stating, the world is faultless. All faults lie within ourselves. And then there is arguably the most challenging line in the whole essay, no soul in hell has been wronged.
Yeah, that's a heavy line.
Applying a cosmic timeline to real-world trauma feels like giving abusers a free pass.
Well, from a conventional human standpoint, your pushback is entirely valid. Human justice operates on a very short, immediate timeline. You know, someone harms you, they are morally wrong, and you are the victim who deserves justice.
Right.
But the text is demanding we abandon the human framework of morality entirely in favor of a kind of metaphysical physics.
Metaphysical physics.
Yeah. When the author says no soul in hell has been wrong, he is asserting that the universe functions like an exact mathematical equation. Every experience, even the incredibly painful ones, is an exact vibrational match to something your soul needs to resolve, balance, or pay back from a vast unseen history.
But doesn't that just obliterate the concept of being a victim? If I tell someone who has been deeply wronged that it's their fault because of some karmic debt they don't even remember, I'm essentially telling them they asked for it. How is that helpful?
The author would likely argue that you are confusing universal mechanics with human blame. It isn't about asking for it in a conscious moral sense. It is about understanding that reality is a projection of one's own consciousness.
A projection?
Yes. The text insists that if there's a problem in your external reality, the root cause lies in your internal consciousness. We instinctively want to point fingers outward. We blame the government, our leaders, our spouses, or the bully. But the text insists reality is just a mirror reflecting your inner state.
So if your consciousness is full of defensive thorns, you will physically manifest a world full of aggressive spears.
Precisely. And that is why the author argues that fighting back with your ego is useless. If you don't like the reflection in a mirror, yelling at the glass accomplishes nothing. You might even break the mirror and cut yourself. The only way to change the reflection is to change the source object, which, in this framework, means dropping the ego entirely so there's nothing left for the universe to attack.
I understand the internal logic, even if it is incredibly difficult to swallow.
Hmm.
Up to this point, though, this all sounds like lofty, almost impossibly abstract philosophy.
It does.
It sounds like a state of mind a monk might achieve after 40 years of silent meditation in a cave. But how does this function for a regular person commuting to work on a Tuesday?
That's the real question.
Which brings us to the final, fascinating revelation of the source material. The author, Suefeng, claims he hasn't just been theorizing about this. He states he has been testing it in a live human laboratory.
Yeah, the text takes a very empirical turn in its final section. Shrefang reveals that for 11 years, he has been conducting an experiment to physically build what he calls the 1,000-year world of the kingdom of heaven, right here in the human world.
He calls the participants in this intentional community the Chanyuan Celestials. It is a society built entirely around the philosophy of abandoning the self. But, like, how does a community of people with no selves actually function day to day?
Right, practically speaking.
Yeah, if no one has any decided opinions or preferences, how do they even decide who cooks dinner or takes out the trash?
Well, the text suggests that when you drop individual identity, work ceases to be a burden placed on me. It simply becomes a necessary function of the collective body. Think of the cells in your own physical body.
Okay.
Your white blood cells don't assert their individual identities or complain that the red blood cells have an easier job. They cooperate seamlessly because they don't perceive themselves as separate from the whole. In a society without egos, tasks are simply completed because they need to be done to maintain the harmony of the environment.
Wow. And the author claims to have concrete empirical data from this 11-year experiment. According to the text, the community serves as living testimony to the mechanics of the ego. The results he presents are pretty definitive. All the participants who insisted on being themselves, who held on to their armor, eventually left the experiment.
Left entirely.
Yeah, and all the people who completely abandoned themselves stayed.
He anchors his entire experiment back to those historical heavy hitters we discussed at the beginning, stating that even if he is personally wrong, the unified teachings of the gods, Buddhas, and ancient sages must be right.
I have to ask a deeply skeptical question about those empirical results, though.
Go for it.
Does an experiment where everyone who disagrees eventually leaves actually prove that you've achieved ultimate universal harmony? Or does it just prove self-selection? I mean, if you systematically filter out every single person who refuses to conform, of course the people left over aren't arguing. It sounds less like heaven on earth and more like an echo chamber of selflessness.
From a traditional sociological standpoint, you are describing classic self-selection bias. But if we evaluate the experiment within the author's established logical framework, that self-selection isn't a flaw in the data. It is the actual mechanism of creating the harmony.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. If the core hypothesis is that the individual self is the sole cause of friction, then an environment must be completely devoid of selves to be friction-free.
So the people leaving isn't a failure of the community. It's the community successfully rejecting a foreign body, like an immune system pushing out a splinter.
Exactly the right metaphor. A community where everyone has completely abandoned their ego doesn't function like a group of individuals negotiating social contracts. It functions like a single, unified organism.
Wow.
The author is suggesting that this specific type of participant, the one who willingly drops their armor and loses their identity, is the only type of person capable of building heaven on earth.
Let's synthesize all of this and bring these immense philosophical concepts back down to earth for you, the listener, navigating a world that constantly screams at you to be yourself. We start by unpacking a unified chorus of ancient wisdom, from Jesus describing the paradox of self-preservation, to the Buddha diagnosing the ego as the root of suffering, to Laozi explaining the mechanics of fear.
Right. And then we explored how the modern obsession with asserting our unique identities creates a world of thorns and spears. We looked at how this friction manifests everywhere, from the micro-level tragedy of a divorce between two rigid personalities, to the macro-level tension of geopolitical conflicts where massive nations act as giant armored egos.
Yeah, those giant magnets.
Exactly. The text's diagnosis is that all conflict is simply the inevitable result of magnets with the same polarity being forced together.
We also wrestled with the radical, deeply uncomfortable responsibility this philosophy demands. The confronting idea that reality is a projection of your own consciousness, requiring you to abandon human frameworks of blame and justice. It asks you to consider that the bully, the bad boss, or the unfair system might just be a mirror reflecting your own unresolved inner state.
Finally, we analyzed the author's 11-year experiment with the Chanyuan celestials, exploring the practical mechanics of a community that functions as a single organism because its members have willingly surrendered their individual identities.
The central takeaway here is profoundly disruptive. The friction you feel in your daily life, the constant anxiety, the draining arguments, the exhausting feeling that you have to continuously defend your territory might not be the world attacking you. It might simply be the heavy armor of your own ego rubbing and clanking against the environment. The very thing you have spent your whole life building to protect yourself is actually what is causing the pain.
It really forces a deep internal audit. Like, how much of your daily exhaustion simply comes from the sheer, unyielding effort required to maintain the character you've decided to play.
Which leads us to a final, provocative thought experiment for you to mull over when this deep dive ends. The text asserts that reality is the projection of one's own consciousness. If that is literally true, think about what you have planned for tomorrow.
Yeah, think about the day ahead.
Think about the people who annoy you, the tasks that stress you out, the specific conflicts you are already dreading. What happens to that physical world around you tomorrow morning if you wake up, look in the mirror, and consciously decide to stop playing the character of you?